So we're going to start today with talking about integers and absolute value for the first part, and then we're going to move on to adding integers. So we're going to do two things. Okay. I'm going to have you write a few things in your notes because you're going to need to remember some of this stuff, and especially as you're doing your homework. So the first thing I'm going to have you write down is this definition. Integers are all whole numbers including 0 and their opposites. Okay. Integers are all whole numbers including 0 and their opposites. Okay, now the nice thing about integers is it's all whole numbers. What does a whole number mean? It's positive, and there's no decimals or fractions. Okay, we'll get to decimals and fractions. Don't worry, we're gonna do that. I know you guys are super excited about that. But for right now, we're gonna focus on only the really nice numbers, right? No decimals, no fractions. Okay, so examples of whole numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But if they're integers, we could also have -1, -2, -3, and so on there. Those are examples of integers. Non-examples? So what would be a non-example of an integer? T. 1.5. 1.5, okay? If we're dealing with fractions or decimals, so 1 and 1/2 is a non-example. 0.7 is not an integer. -1/4. A negative sign does not make it an integer. It has to be a negative whole number to be an integer. So none of those are integers. Okay? Okay, the next thing is opposites. And opposites are two numbers that are equal distance from 0. So they have to be the same distance from 0 on a number line. And this is pretty simple. What's the opposite of 15? Take a guess. -15. What's the opposite of -4? 4. Do we put a plus sign in front of a 4 to show it's positive? No, you just leave it as 4. Okay. The opposite of -7? 7. The opposite of 2? The opposite of 10? -10. The opposite of 0? 0. Okay, 0 really doesn't have an opposite. 0 is its own opposite. There's no -0. Don't ever say -0. People look at you like you're crazy. Okay, no such thing. Questions on that part? Do you need a second to finish writing? Some of you. And remember, I'm going to post these on Canvas, so you'll be able to come back to the notes if you need to. Okay, so let's compare some things. If I was going to compare 5 and 12, and we're going to use these symbols, we have to remember that this is a less than symbol. This one is greater than. And then obviously equal. So 5 and 12, how would you compare them? Would you say 5 is greater than 12 or less than 12 or equal to 12? Which one? That's easy, right? If we're awake and alive right now, I'm not sure that we all are. 5 is less than 12. Okay, right? Yeah. And we learned that when you're using those symbols, you want to eat the bigger number, right? Did you learn that in elementary school? Yes? Okay, good. At least I got a head nod out of some of you. Okay, how about -5 and 12? Would I say -5 is less than 12 or -5 is greater than 12? T? Less than again. Okay, a negative number is always less than a positive number. Positive numbers are always bigger. How about negative 5 and negative 12? Luke? Greater than. Okay, when they are both negative, the one that's closer to 0 is bigger. So if we're looking at a number line, -1, -2, -3, -4, it keeps getting smaller the further down you go, right? Think of it in terms of money. You're -$12 in the hole or -5? Well, I'd rather be -5. At least then I don't owe somebody quite as much. Okay. If we had to put these in order from least to greatest, these three numbers, what's the lowest number up there? 35, -16, and -2. Which one is the lowest? Caitlin? -16. So that would be the least. Then what would come next? Brady? -2. And then finally, 35. 35 would be the biggest. Questions on that piece? Okay, you're going to have to do some comparing and ordering of numbers that way. Then, the big thing we're going to talk about today is absolute value. Put this in your notes. Okay, absolute value is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. The distance between the number and 0 on a number line. And it's written as, it looks like this. Okay, it's these two vertical lines. They're not curved, they're not parentheses. They're just straight lines. And that means absolute value. The other key thing that I want you to make sure and write in your notes is that absolute value is always positive. No matter what, it has to be positive. Okay, and it's always positive because distance has to be positive. If I'm going to drive from my house to school, I maybe drive 10 miles. If I drive it backwards, do I still drive 10 miles? Do I get to subtract miles off my car if I drive backwards? I wish. It'd be sweet. I could sell my car with 0 miles on it. It could still be worth money. But unfortunately, that's not the case. If I drive backwards all the way to school, people just look at me real weird. What is this crazy woman doing? Okay, so it doesn't matter what number is inside of these parentheses, or inside of those two lines, your answer is going to always be positive. Okay, so when you see something like this, this means the absolute value of -3. And the absolute value of -3 is 3, because it's 3 units away from 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0. The absolute value of 5 is 5, because it's 5 units away from 0. Okay, so what would be the absolute value of -20? What do you think? Caitlin? 20. It's 20 units away from 0. What's the absolute value of 7? T. 7. Because it's 7 units away from 0. Okay? So what's the absolute value of -15? Brady? 15. It's always positive. The absolute value of 6 is, shout it out, 6. It's 6 units away from 0. What's the absolute value of 0? Absolute value of -5. Okay, here this gets tricky. The negative absolute value of 12. That one's -12. Can anybody explain why that answer is negative? Because I said absolute value is always positive, but why is that answer negative?
Oh, I guess.
Go ahead. You guessed right. Lizzie, why?
Maybe because the negative sign is on the outside, so
Abs-
when you took away the lines, you could add it to.
Absolutely. So another phrase I can use for negative is the opposite of. Okay? So this is really saying the opposite of the absolute value of 12. The absolute value of 12 is 12. The opposite of that is negative 12. Does that make sense? So we do what's in the absolute value signs first, and then we stick the negative sign on. So what do you think this last one's going to be? Brady, go ahead. What do you think? You were right, Kristen. Negative 23. Because the absolute value of negative 23 is 23, but it's the opposite of that, or the negative of that, so it's negative 23. So when there's a negative sign in front, your answer can be negative. But if it's in the absolute value signs, then your answer is positive. Okay? So let's try a couple of these comparing ones. If I'm going to compare 4 and the absolute value of negative 4. What is the absolute value of negative 4? That's just 4. So, greater than, less than, or equal to? Equal. They are equal to each other. How about the absolute value of 2 and negative 2? What's the absolute value of 2? 2. So how do those compare? Go ahead, T. It's greater than. 2 is greater than negative 2. Okay, positive is always bigger. How about negative 50 and negative 42? Which one's bigger? Tell me which one's bigger and then I'll know what sign to use. Is negative 50 bigger or negative 42 bigger?
42.
Ready?
Negative 42.
Good, so I should put a less than sign. This is the bigger number. 12 and 17, that better be an easy one. You guys, if you get ones like this wrong, I'm gonna wonder, like, where have you been in the last 12 years of your life? 12 is less than. Pretty easy way. Okay, how about the next one? The negative absolute value of 3 and 3. What does this right here equal? That equals negative 3. Right, because the negative sign is outside of the absolute value. So is negative 3 bigger or less than 3? Less than. It is less than 3. What's the absolute value of negative 7? 7. Is negative 7 less than 7 or greater than 7? Less than. Negative is always less than a positive. Questions there? Okay, if you're asked to simplify an expression that has absolute value, pretty simple. I ask you to simplify this expression. Well, what's the absolute value of negative 4? 4. And what's the absolute value of 12? 12, because remember, absolute value is always positive. 4 plus 12 is 16. Okay, so you're not going to be adding any negative numbers here because it's always going to be positive. If you have an absolute value sign like this next one where there's 2 things inside of there, that means do what's in the absolute value sign first. So what's 15 minus 4? 11. So it's the absolute value of 11, which is 11. Questions there? Any questions from anyone? Okay, so what